Hello all, my name is Melise Posledon from the Berkeley Political Review, and I'm here with Professor David Oppenheimer of Berkeley Law School, also known as the Diversity Detective.
Huh.
Uh, we're here today to talk about his upcoming book, The Diversity Principle, The Story of a Transformative Idea, which is releasing February 2026. It can be pre-ordered on bookshop.org and Amazon. So welcome, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us, and do you think you could tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Melise. I'd be delighted. I've been a law professor since 1982. I practiced for a while, practicing equality and anti-discrimination law,
Mhm.
handling sex discrimination and race discrimination and disability discrimination cases, mostly here in California. I currently teach civil procedure and evidence, which are the foundational courses for the American litigation system. And I teach a course in comparative equality law where there are 12 of us at 12 universities on 4 continents who teach together. We teach a seminar once a week with our own students, and then once a week we meet on Zoom and we all teach together. I've written, I don't know, dozens, scores of articles about discrimination law and about civil rights history, and 9 books. And my ninth is the book, the Diversity Principle.
Well, do you think you could give us a brief overview of the book?
Sure, the book tells the story
Mhm.
through the people who moved it forward of the idea that diversity is something of measurable and meaningful value. We start in 1810 with the founding of the first modern research university, which was the University of Berlin. It was founded by Wilhelm von Humboldt. It's now called Humboldt University.
Mm.
And it was founded on this principle that professors and students should interact with each other, should learn from each other, should do experimental work together. And because he saw the value in diversity, the university was opened to Catholics and to Jews, where otherwise it would have been completely a Prussian Protestant university. His ideas spread to England, and the work of um, John Stuart Mill and his lover and then ultimately wife, Harriet Taylor Mill. And they wrote a number of books together. One of them was On Liberty, which is really one of the great books of political theory in the English language. If you were to read the book again today, you would say, this really ought to be called On Liberty and Diversity, because diversity runs all through it. Humboldt runs all through it.
Mhm.
And, and I take it from there all the way up through the 19th and 20th centuries and up to today and the war on diversity
Right.
in a nutshell.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that one.
Okay. Good.
But I do have a question. So you mentioned that Humboldt was the first university, the first research university, and do you know anything about Humboldt if they've kept up these diversity values that they've instilled or that they were the pioneers of?
So Humboldt University has gone through quite a few changes at various times. Uh, at one point in the um, late 19th century, they expelled all of the Catholic students.
Okay.
Early in the 20th century, they expelled all of the Jewish students and faculty
Okay.
and played an instrumental role in sending them to be murdered in the death camps. Um, in the late 1940s through the 1980s, they were in East Germany, and it was very much a communist university, which means that it was not a place in which there was free thought. Today, it is again a great research university, and all of the great research universities in the world recognize the value of at least some kinds of diversity as being central to what they do.
Right. So I wanted to ask, what first led you to write the diversity principle, and why do you think this history matters at this moment in time, with obviously the recent shrinking and elimination of DEI efforts by the Trump administration?
Can we take that as two questions?
Yes.
Good. So I've been working in the area of civil rights history and in the area of civil rights law, writing about it, some pieces doctrinal, some theoretical, some historical, and very little about diversity. And then I was on sabbatical and I was sitting in a cafe with a colleague, and we were talking about what's called the business case for diversity. And I said, well, I think it all started with Baki. And she said, well, maybe that could be, but I've never seen proof of that. And so I came back at the end of the sabbatical. I came back here to my office in Berkeley, and I had some research assistants, some law students, and some undergraduate research assistants through the wonderful URAP program. And I said, let's try to figure out where this idea that diversity is important, is valuable for learning, where it came from. And that set us off on what turned out to be a 12-year journey.
Wow.
That took me places that I never imagined I was going to go.
Did you know you were always going to write a book, or were you just curious about the idea?
I started out curious about the idea, and then it was going to be an article, and then it was going to be a book.
Mm.
And now it's been a couple of articles and a Supreme Court brief.
Wow.
And now a book. And
maybe a movie?
There's more to be done. Oh, the movie. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was really curious about this when I was reading through the Amazon abstract, I guess you could say, about it. Yale describes you as a former diversity skeptic turned diversity admirer. What was the particular turning point or case that shifted your perspective on diversity?
Oh, great question.
I was so curious when I was diversity
you.
skeptic. And then now you're writing a book. It's amazing.
Well, of course, most of the books about diversity are written by the diversity skeptics. It's part of the problem.
Yeah, good point.
But I started out thinking that this was just an excuse to help improve the education of white college students by exposing them to the life experience of a few black students. And it's not that that was a bad thing, but it wasn't an important thing for black students and for their opportunities.
Right.
And so I thought that the idea that we should celebrate diversity as this great thing for black Americans and for other people of color and for women and for people who are outsiders in all kinds of ways, it just didn't seem honest to me. It seemed like this wasn't for their benefit. And I resented that. And I thought that was morally wrong. And then I started doing this research. And the more I learned, the more I appreciated the way in which diversity really is tied to liberty, that John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill had it right. And in terms of law, the argument in favor of diversity shows up in Justice Powell's opinion in the Bakke case. And he's basically saying, yeah, we should have some black kids in the classroom because that'll be good for white kids in their education. I mean, that's
not actually focused on the diversity, it's just focused on the white people's experience.
Yeah. And that is not surprising given Justice Powell's views about desegregation, about black Americans, about racism. He was somewhere between very conservative and reactionary in terms of his views on race. But then I read what Pauli Murray had to say to Thurgood Marshall about the diversity principle. And she nailed it. I say she. Okay, let's go back a step. Do you even know who I'm talking about?
No.
I'm sorry. That's not fair for me to. I'm not supposed to interview you. But, okay,
no, I mean, sometimes it turns into a two-way thing,
Okay,
but,
good.
But please,
Good.
an explanation would be nice.
Pauli Murray
Hmm.
was a queer black woman who today would almost certainly identify as a trans man.
Hmm.
She was a lawyer, she was an activist, and in time, she left the law. She became an Episcopal priest, and she has been beatified by the Episcopal Church, so she is now a saint.
Oh.
She grew up in the South. She grew up in North Carolina. She wanted to go to the University of North Carolina, but they didn't admit black people. She ended up going to New York to Hunter College. She became very much a part of that incredible Renaissance in Harlem, the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s and 30s, and a published poet. And then she wanted to go to law school. She became an activist, and she wanted to go to law school. So she couldn't go to the University of North Carolina, where she was a resident,
Right.
because they didn't admit black people. She went to Howard Law School. They tried to laugh her out of class. She was the only woman in her class. The men wouldn't talk to her. The professors wouldn't talk to her. She was utterly isolated. She finished first in her class. Finishing first in her class meant that she had a right to go on to a PhD program at Harvard. But Harvard didn't admit women.
Oh, well.
So she ended up here at Berkeley, where she got her LLM. She lived in the I House, just up the
Oh,
street from where we
nice.
are right now. She wrote a paper while she was at Berkeley. Well, she wrote the first American Law Review article on sex discrimination in employment, published in the California Law Review. And she wrote a paper about how to look at the issues of civil rights under the Constitution that helped persuade Thurgood Marshall to shift the argument that he was making in the desegregation cases, because she made the argument that racial diversity, desegregation, would be of enormous benefit to black children. And she demonstrated the ways in which diversity was essential to the experience of everyone and to the benefit of the black children and black students who would be a part of a desegregated law school, a desegregated university, a desegregated high school or elementary school. And it shifted the argument that ended up in Brown v. Board of Education.
Wow.
She went on to help found the National Organization for Women, and then resigned because they weren't reaching out to poor women and to women of color. She went to work for the ACLU, helped convince them they should have a women's rights project, and then convinced them that that shy academic who they'd interviewed and they weren't necessarily going to hire would be a brilliant hire. That was Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Wow.
Together,
Wow.
they wrote the brief that got the Supreme Court to shift its view of whether sex discrimination is a violation of the 14th Amendment. Along the way, she helped save the sex discrimination provision in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The list of her accomplishments goes on and on and on. I think she was the greatest civil rights lawyer of the 20th century. And I say that having always believed that Thurgood Marshall was just the greatest lawyer of the 20th century, bar
Right.
none. She was extraordinary, and because she was a queer woman,
Hmm.
she is virtually unknown.
Yes, I was about to say I don't know anything about her.
Yeah.
And I mean the fact that I go to Berkeley, I'm a political science major. I'm interested in going to law school. You would think that at some point I would have come across this woman,
Yes, you would.
especially because she was a Berkeley alum, or a Berkeley, important figure in Berkeley. But that's pretty ridiculous. I don't.
Well, the lounge in the student center at the law school is about to be renamed in her name, because my wife and I are making a gift to the law school
Really?
in order to endow that lounge. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, Thank you for that. I work here, so
Yeah,
I will.
that's right.
I
Yes,
work here, so maybe I could enjoy it myself, or maybe I'll come here one day and I'll be able to enjoy it.
that'd be
But
great.
that's an amazing accomplishment. Thank you for sharing that. So I wanted to ask as well, going back to the two-parter question that I had asked before.
Yes.
Yes. With the recent undermining of uh, diversity efforts and elimination of DEI efforts by the Trump administration, and in virtually every sector of our society, how do you envision? This is a large question, but how do you envision the country's development, or why do you think this history, this book that you're writing, matters in this moment of time? It's a large question, so
Sure.
tackle it however you please.
I'm hoping the book matters in that I'm hoping that people say, oh my God, what we're doing is terrible. It's a mistake and it's not too late to fix it.
Hmm.
So it's not that I'm, thinking of this book as a little thing. It's
Right.
it it if the book gets an audience, it will be the most important thing I've done in a career of 50 years.
Well, I
So
see the effort you're putting into it. And you've been writing it for 12 years, and I can see how important this is to you.
thank you.
Yeah.
What the Trump administration has done is to have systematically reduced employment opportunities for women, for people of color, and especially for women of color. There have been 98 presidential appointments in the first 200 days of the Trump administration that had to go to the Senate for Senate confirmation. Two of those 98 were Black Americans, both of whom were men. Not a single, not a single Black woman appointed out of those 98 appointments, when they represent 7 to 8% of the workforce in our country. Every science project that focuses on the lives of women and or people of color and or LGBT people has either been suspended, canceled, or is at risk. Virtually every science program in which the principal investigators are women and or people of color and or LGBT people is at risk if it hasn't already been canceled or suspended. Why? Because the Trump administration says it's not aligned with our goals to fund science done by women and or people of color and or LGBT people, or science that would benefit women and or people of color and or LGBT people.
Right.
The administration has, within the federal government, fired anyone whose work was in any way adjacent to diversity work.
Right.
The effect of that is, one, this enormous reduction in the number of particularly Black workers, particularly Black women workers, and an enormous reduction in the ability of the federal government to address issues of racial discrimination or gender discrimination or gender orientation discrimination. All of that just disappears. The Trump administration has ordered companies illegally, all of this is illegal,
Yes.
but
It's all
ordered
ridiculous.
companies to end all of their diversity efforts or they'll be sued.
Yeah.
Now, those lawsuits will be illegitimate. Those lawsuits will be based on a completely wrong-headed view of the law. But companies are afraid
Right.
not to comply.
Right.
The Trump administration has ordered universities to end all of their diversity programs.
Yes.
The Trump administration has ordered all American law firms to essentially stop hiring students of color. Now, they've put it in terms of end your diversity efforts, but in the absence of those diversity efforts, the number of Black lawyers and other students of color taking jobs, receiving jobs in big law is going to drop dramatically.
Yes.
We've already seen, because of the Supreme Court's decision in the Students for Fair Admissions case, a drop at many schools of an enormous drop in terms of the number of black students. This is all going to be ratcheted up so that economic opportunities, educational opportunities, career opportunities for women, for women of color, for people of color, for LGBT people, and for the intersection of any of those kinds of identity drop precipitously.
It's interesting as well because I mean Trump's only been in office for his second term for under a year, and we're already seeing these effects that you mentioned.
Yes.
What we can't even begin to think of what's going to happen in the long run, even when he's out of office. It's just like a complete reset of decades of progress, and it's it's there's really not much I can say at least, but it's kind of the words are taken out of my mouth.
There was a really good podcast, if I can mention one of your competitors,
Yes, of course we're equal around here.
On The Daily, the New York Times
Mm-hmm.
podcast, a few days ago with Nicole Hannah-Jones, who
Mm-hmm.
is a remarkable historian and journalist. And she was talking a little bit about the period of time known as the nadir, the period of time after Reconstruction and before the modern civil rights movement, when things just went backwards for Black Americans,
Mm-hmm.
so that there were suddenly there were virtually no Black members of Congress. There were no Black judges. There were no Black mayors or governors. In the South, Black people couldn't vote. There was segregation all through the country. There were no educational opportunities for Black people except limited opportunities at the historically Black colleges and universities. Um, the economic position of Black Americans was dire and worse. Um, we're headed back in that direction. It's a it's a moral and legal travesty.
And you mentioned universities as well in the last question, and I wanted to ask how you see universities balancing these these recent crackdowns, I guess, these recent limitations, or how do you see them balancing the diversity principle with the current legal limits on race conscious politics after recent Supreme Court rulings? I have an example. Like the court allowed Trump to terminate federal teaching grants because they were part of a larger DEI effort that, like we've mentioned, they've been trying to crack down on.
So here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Most university administrators know that diversity of all kinds, racial and ethnic and religious diversity, experiential diversity, viewpoint diversity, the point that um, the Mills made about diversity is that viewpoint diversity is the result of experiential diversity, of racial and ethnic and religious diversity. That diversity in how people have lived their lives and where people have lived their lives, that all of that contributes to better learning in the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
greater scientific discoveries. Uh, the diversity principle has been on the same arc really as our understanding of global climate change. That in 1970, the idea that we might be on the cusp of experiencing global climate change as a result of carbon in the atmosphere was a theory
Right.
that didn't have much evidence to support it. It was
Right.
speculation. It was an interesting speculation. There were people who were worried about it, but that was a pretty small number.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it's hard to find a reputable scientist who doesn't believe that our environment is changing
Mm-hmm.
and that the globe is warming because of the amount of carbon we've put in the atmosphere. in the same way, in the 1970s, the diversity principle was, and had been for 150 years, this interesting theory. And it was based in part on observation and experience, and in part on just a sense of understanding about how people learn. So people like John Dewey, the great educator of the early 20th century, who was very committed to the idea of diversity. But some of his findings were observational, but most of it was simply this is how things should work. I may not be entirely fair there. I think there was a good deal that was observational. But now we're at a point where we know from thousands of empirical studies that diversity really matters, that there is a diversity effect, that scientists do make greater discoveries in a diverse lab,
Right.
that students in a diverse classroom really do learn more.
Mm-hmm.
And so most university administrators, they know this, but they also know that their jobs are on the line, their university funding is in danger, and they've got alumni from across the board, many of whom don't understand this, don't appreciate it, or don't like the idea, who are pushing them to participate in the president's efforts against diversity. And so what you're going to see, I think, is continuing attempts to negotiate compromise, to avoid antagonizing the president,
Mm-hmm.
while trying to protect academic freedom. And some universities will do a better job than others.
Do you think do you think at this point there is even room for compromise? Negotiations?
Well, there's always room to listen to another person and try to learn from their point of view.
I like that answer. So if policymakers, educators, leaders were to embrace the diversity principle, what changes would you hope to see in the classroom, workplaces, or just overall civic life? And what do you think also would this look like just in the larger scope of society? I guess it doesn't have to be a very complex answer, but
I would hope that we would see a continuing recognition and growing recognition of the value of diversity.
mhm,
I would hope that we would see people open to talking with people they disagree with, listening to people they disagree with. I think that's very important.
mhm,
I would hope we would see a return to greater civility in the way people talk about things on which they disagree. You know, John Stuart Mill said, the person I disagree with is my ally climbing the same hill, but on the other side. That's a lovely idea.
yeah,
Now, it's also the case that John Stuart Mill was very close friends in his youth with another political theorist. Oh, whose name I can't remember.
it's
It's terrible.
all
But
right. We can
Carlyle,
edit it in.
Thomas
Ah,
Carlyle,
okay.
and Carlyle became a supporter of slavery, and Mill was so distressed that their friendship could not survive that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do our best to try to listen to others, to try to respect other views. There are times that we have to reject as a moral question views that we disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
But they should be at the level of Carlyle's support of slavery rather than the little things that can set us off.
I see. I feel like I have a larger question because there's so many people that like I said before, like at this point of in our country where just political polarization is just taken over, and both sides, Democrats and Republicans, can't seem to agree on anything. I mean, we're in a government shutdown for what is it, 30, 32 days, 35 days, something along those lines,
I'm
or
not counting.
yeah. See, it's or maybe I think it's more in the 20s, but all I know is that for me, for example, I'm going to lose my EBT if
Oh
they
no.
continue to be shut down. So, and I understand, it's important to keep each other's differing views in mind, and I completely agree with that. I just I just know that a lot of people just don't see that as a option anymore. And I know that Democrats, they still hold up the idea of we need to negotiate, we need to come together, we need to listen to each other. I mean, that's the whole point, right? But it's just hard for a lot of people, I think myself included, to see any little bit of compromise in this point of time, or efforts towards it at least.
Well, no, I understand. I mean, you can't capitulate. You can't. Sometimes you can't compromise with somebody who's just uncompromising, or unreasonable. And the demands that are being made currently on universities are unreasonable. They
Mm-hmm.
should be rejected. The the universities certainly can do more to encourage opportunities for diverse voices to be heard, including at a place like Berkeley, the voices of conservative students and faculty. Now, I think Berkeley does that,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean we can't do more of it, and we can't do more publicity of the fact that we do it.
Right.
Um, but I'm not suggesting that people compromise on critical moral or ethical questions. But
Mm-hmm.
I am suggesting that people need to listen to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that means finding somebody who you can converse with, someone you can negotiate with, or talk with, or compromise with. Sometimes there is no compromise because there's no one who is willing to engage.
Right. I guess the larger idea is just don't lose the idea of compromise, even if nobody's willing to do it. You need to keep the principle of it and not just completely give up when you're faced with an obstacle of somebody who's not going to compromise with you. So, for our last question,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
if you could summarize the diversity principle in one sentence that you hope readers remember 10 years from now, what would it be? And you can think for as long as you want, but
I don't need to.
oh, perfect, perfect.
I don't mean I don't need to think.
Okay.
When you mix together people from different backgrounds and experiences, people who are outsiders and insiders, people of different races and genders and ethnicities and religions and ages, and speak different languages, and you give them the opportunity to engage with each other, to learn from each other, you will have greater learning, you will have greater scientific inquiry and discovery. Um, in business, you'll have more successful businesses. In democratic discourse, you'll have more ideas, you'll have more opportunity for people to find ways to come together. You'll build a better society.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and discussing your ideas. So, the Diversity Principle releases on February 24th,
That's great.
2026, and you can pre order it now on bookshop.org and Amazon. And make sure to follow Professor Oppenheimer on Instagram at the Diversity Detective for updates. And yeah, that was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.